Welcome back, students. Today we are going to discuss the remaining contents of our novel Jane Eyre. We are going to discuss themes. First of all, here is the list of the themes that can be considered the most important themes of this novel, Jane Eyre. First of all, we can find the theme of love and family actively working in this very novel Jane Eyre. Secondly, independence, the empowerment, social norms, gender roles, religion, desire versus sensibility, spirituality and supernaturalism. So, briefly, these are the most important and prominent themes of the very novel Jane Eyre. Let's discuss each of these themes in details. The first theme is love and family. Love is the most prevalent theme of this novel, Jane Eyre. It is significant for Jane. The concept of love, the institution of love and family are very significantly highlighted in this very novel, because it is shown in this very novel that these two things, they are very significant for Jane Eyre due to her deprived childhood. She was deprived of love and family bonds. She tried to search them in Rochester, but the social and religious values just forbade her. She was a strong woman and wanted a relationship based on respect and social integrity of the matrimonial relations or of the matrimonial bonds. That's why she had to take a very bold decision of leaving Rochester on the day of their wedding, because on that day she had to realize that Rochester was already married and she did not want to live as his mistress. So that's why Jane had to take this very difficult decision of leaving her love for Rochester, because all she wanted was love along with social and cultural integrity. The next theme we find actively working in this very novel, the aspect we find actively working in this very novel or in the plot of this very novel is independence, particularly the independence of a woman, means the empowerment of a woman. So in this way, the very novel Jane Eyre can be taken as one of the feminist works of Victorian era. Jane's struggle since her childhood transformed her into a strong and brave lady, a woman who did not only want a value of her own, but a status with social integrity. Jane's decisions in life often took her to kill her emotions, yet she managed bravely and gracefully, as it is found in the plot of the novel. Jane had to take very tough decisions, very difficult decisions, and in result of those decisions, she had to kill her emotions. She had to just feel pain within her own self. But in order to manage a strong and independent status as a woman in that society of the time, she had to take those decisions. This is actually what makes her an independent woman, an independent character of this novel, Jane Eyre. The next important aspects are social norms and gender roles. Yes, these are again very important things in terms of Victorian novels and in terms of Victorian society as well. Victorian norms and social standards were conformist and typical. And as we all know that the time of Victorian era, it was divided in two major phases, and the very time period was the time of political transformation of England, and that was the socially it was a prosperous time period, but it was the age of hypocrisy, and it was the time period of an ongoing conflict between religion and technology, morality versus science, or we can say morality versus modernity. So these things can be found in the novels, in the themes of this novel. So social norms and gender roles. So let's discuss the aspects of social norms and gender roles in details. Victorian norms and social standards were conformist and typical. Women were not assumed as powerful and sensible beings. That's why Jane had to face that in the form of Rochester's attempt in marrying her. He was so confident on his masculinism, on his status as a man, as a powerful businessman, as a wealthy man, that he did not bother to take care of Jane's emotions, not only of Jane's emotions, but also of her self-respect. Well, Jane stood tall as a feminist figure in this way because she just managed to leave the situation by killing her emotions for Rochester and by getting rid of that environment. She didn't bend herself to the weakness of emotions customary to a woman on that time. The next important theme that we can find working in this novel is religion. The role of religious values is depicted in a bit optimistic, contrary to other Victorian novels, because in this very novel, religion is somehow celebrated, it is acknowledged, because the very positive aspects of religion are highlighted in the character of John, because he had a mission to spread the message of Christianity. And on the other hand, when we find Jane taking a decision of not to marry Rochester, because he was going to marry Jane, and he was going to keep her as his second wife, while in Christianity they only have the permission of one marriage. So those were the religious aspects that were given respect and that were celebrated in this very novel, Jane Eyre. So contrary to other Victorian novels, religion in this very novel, Jane Eyre, is taken in a bit optimistic way. Jane, on realizing the status of Bertha, who was the religiously accepted first wife of Mr. Rochester, she left Rochester, even though Bertha was portrayed as an insane woman. Well, the next aspect we can find working in this very novel is desire versus sensibility. Again, the very aspect is actively working in the development of Jane Eyre's character, because she all the time she just chooses her sensibility over desire. She just takes her decisions on the basis of her sensibility and not on the basis of her desires. So it's a very important aspect where sensibility wins over the desire. Desire wins in the shadow of sensibility of circumstances, because if we just focus on the end of this novel, when Jane decided to marry Rochester, it was the time when Bertha Mason wasn't alive, and Rochester, he was totally helpless because of the loss of his business, and not only of his business but also of his eyesight. So he was in need of Jane. That's why on that time Jane's decision of marrying Rochester was not only based on her desire, but it was based on her sensibility. Then another very important aspect is spiritualism and supernaturalism. Both of these elements we can find in the plot of this novel, Jane Eyre. Supernaturalism is shown in two forms. On one hand, an imaginative ghost of Mr. Reed, which actually depicts Jane's own state of mind in distress while she was just locked up in the red room by Mrs. Reed. So on that time, gradually she just had to face this very fear of Mr. Reed's ghost. It was actually Jane's own. It was the manifestation of Jane's own fear, Jane's own mind. So here we can find the aspect of supernaturalism in this very novel. But in fact, it wasn't supernaturalism. It was justified later on, because it was due to the fear of a child. The fear of a child is shown actually in this very thing, finding a ghost or imagining a ghost. Then secondly, the haunted aspect of Rochester's palace was due to Bertha's destructive mental state. Again, both of these things are scientifically and psychologically justified, because the hauntedness of the haunted house of Mr. Rochester, or the haunted palace of Mr. Rochester, the hauntedness and fear of that very palace was due to the or we can say it was actually the reflection of Bertha's destructive state of mental health. So both of these things, although they apparently seem supernatural, but in fact both of these things they are mentally, scientifically and psychologically justified. Then this is how Charlotte Bronte uses Gothic settings in her novel Jane Eyre, because she normally uses this sort of techniques of Gothic novels in her novels by showing the aspects of supernaturalism. Jane is portrayed as a spiritually awakened being in terms of her feelings and state of in terms of feeling the things so deeply on spiritual grounds. For example, when during a walk with John, she just feels the vibes, the disturbed vibes from Miss Rochester, and it was actually her feelings. It was due to the spiritual side of her personality that she was feeling those messages from Rochester. It was sort of a telepathy, but we can say scientifically it was somehow telepathy. So Jane is portrayed as a spiritually awakened being in terms of her feelings, in terms of her feeling the state of Rochester's miles away from her. Or miles away from him. Next thing we are going to discuss are the major characters of this novel, Jane Eyre, and first of all, the most important character is Jane Eyre herself, the protagonist of this novel. Then secondly, Mr. Edward Fairfax Rochester, who is the hero of this novel. Then St. John Rivers and Bertha Mason. These are the important and representative characters of this very novel, Jane Eyre. First of all, let's discuss the character of Jane Eyre. Jane is the protagonist as well as the narrator of this novel. Jane is an orphaned girl suffering due to her financial conditions, because she was a child, she was a helpless child with no financial aid except the help of Mrs. Reed. So due to her financial freedom, she has to, or in order to gain the financial freedom, she has to work as a governess at Thornfield Hall, and then Jane had a desire to develop a relation with others, as due to her isolated life at Lowood, she had no ties or relations. Well, if we just analyze the whole thing, there are some typographic errors over here because, I'm sorry for those typographical errors. Jane actually, the desire of love was she was harboring this desire somewhere inside herself, somewhere inside her personality, because she had a lonely childhood, she had a lonely time of adulthood she had to spend at the charity school Lowood, from where she got her education. So that's why Jane Eyre was a soul that was craving for, or who was craving for, love. She had a desire for having her own family, but she wanted that all along with her self-esteem and her personal freedom. During the course of this novel, she learned to control her passion in respect of the social values and Christian humility. She learned to reconcile her contradictory aspects of personal desire of independence and to serve a man. Jane got a lot of strength and maturity from the religious teachings. So this is how religion is positively highlighted in the novel Jane Eyre. The next important character is the character of Mr. Edward Fairfax Rochester. He was the owner of Thornfield Hall and was the wealthy master of Jane. He was a decent, humble, and yet a strong-willed man. He was worthy of Jane's love and companionship. Means he was, from the inside, he was a very humble man, he was a very kind person, and he deserved Jane's love and Jane's companionship. But he was somehow he wasn't doing the things fairly. He was erroneous at understanding and judging Jane's expectations, and tried to exercise his will by marrying her, concealing his first marriage with Bertha Mason. That's why the whole situation had to collapse. After losing his eyesight and after losing his house, he got himself aligned with the ways of God for man. He wanted a guidance, and he got that new transformed humility in his character after he had to face crisis in his life. So he had to realize his own true self after facing the crisis and the losses of his life. He later gained strength from his transformed self and humility. The third important character is the character of St. John Rivers, who was accidentally exposed or appeared as a cousin of Jane Eyre. He had two sisters. They were actually three siblings, and they were Jane's cousins. St. John and Jane had a common personality trait, and that was restlessness. He was commanding. He was a commanding personality, just like Mr. Rochester. It was actually showing the male mindset of the time, that they had a bossy personality and they always wanted to exercise their will. So just like Rochester, Mr. John Rivers, he too had a very commanding personality. John had a tendency towards the religious teachings because he considered it a self commitment that he wanted to teach Christianity, he wanted to spread the message of Christianity in and across the world. Particularly, he decided to visit subcontinent for his mission. While Rochester was a businessman and a worldly person in his terms and affairs. John was a bit self-denying and cold in his religious notion of self-annihilation. Then comes the last important character, and that is the character of Bertha Mason. Bertha Mason, she was actually a very mysterious character, and if we just analyze this very character of Bertha Mason in terms of post-colonial perspective, then the very novel Jane Eyre had to face a very severe sort of criticism because it has been worked on by a lot of researchers. So Bertha Mason, a mysteriously portrayed character, was Rochester's first wife from Jamaica, and the very character of Bertha Mason and her mysterious personality was actually showing the Western mindset towards the colonies of Africa and India on that time. She was represented as an insane lady who was locked away in the third floor of the Thornfield Hall. Her character is portrayed as more than a monster. She also represents the secrets and monstrous side of Mr. Rochester. Yes, her being locked up in the third floor of the palace, it actually shows the very heinous side of Mr. Rochester's personality as well. Let's move to the important quotations of this very novel, or I think we should have a separate session on the important quotations, means on the discussion of the important quotations of this very novel, Jane Eyre. So thank you so much for today. Allah Hafiz.